order the Montpelier-Roxbury Public School District Board of School Directors. We'll begin with public comment. Any members of the public wish to provide comment? Seeing none, we will make up 10 minutes worth of time and get to the consent agenda.
Andrew,
Yeah.
are there really 7 people on Zoom?
They're Orca.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure there
The
wasn't.
other thing I'm wondering
There's two
about
of
is
them.
that typically the camera picks up the entire school board from Orca.
I have Rob coming too, right? Just so you know.
Okay, so Rock can, okay,
Yeah,
thanks.
right now I'm just getting a black
You
screen.
don't want just your face for
I
the next
mean-
2 hours.
Well, don't let me use, I didn't have it set up like that. I don't know why it's not shooting that.
Yeah, that's all right. They can look at Jim and I too, that's fine.
All right, moving on to the consent agenda. Does somebody want to pull anything or motion to approve the consent agenda? Yeah.
I move to approve the consent agenda with the exception of the draft agenda for November 17th.
Second,
second.
all those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right, so draft agenda 1117.
So I just wanted to offer, and I didn't actually check with the rest of the superintendent evaluation committee on this, but that the superintendent evaluation committee could do the update. That's currently blank right now. We can fill in that blank. Including adding an executive session to just finalize Libby's eval from the 2021 school year, which we are behind on. So I just want to get that all wrapped up. If everybody's okay with that, that's what I'd like to add to the agenda for next week.
Sounds good to me. I'm glad you pulled this because I also think it would be helpful to the board to discuss the student representative position or positions to the board. And it looked like next time would have room for that. Emma, what do you think about putting that?
Yeah, I think that would be great.
Great. Emma did, I just want to put this out there. Emma did an amazing job drafting the general outline. And then it came to me and I put in some comments, thoughts, suggested edits, and I think we'll meet in the next week and then send something out to the board for discussion. At our next board meeting. Okay, so.
Well, I have one more
Okay.
to add to the day. Do we want to add that now, Emma and Jim? To the
Today or to the
17th?
For the
agenda.
17th.
Yeah,
Yeah, we
17th.
wanted to put forward for board approval, the equity framework tool. What are we calling it exactly?
The equity policy review tool that the equity committee developed.
We wanted to make sure that was added.
Sounds good. In terms of the timing of these different items for the executive session, how much time do you think we'll need? 20
I'm not-
minutes?
I'm not sure, but I would just put it at the end, and that way Libby doesn't have to stick around.
That's a good point. In terms of the student board representative, I feel like we probably need, what, 20 minutes, do you think? Or is that,
It would be for like approving the language of that.
more than even just that language, I was thinking just that we all have like a common understanding of like what the expectations will be and.
Sure. I
What-
think if we budget 20 minutes, we might even be able to come under
Yeah,
that.
okay. And then.
And we will be able to see that beforehand.
Yeah, we're gonna meet in the next week, and then we'll send it out to everybody. So 20 minutes for student. The equity policy review tool.
20, if everybody looks at it beforehand.
So let's give it 30.
Okay.
That might be good questions. But yeah, and Amanda sent it out yesterday or Monday, so we have plenty of time before next meeting.
I appreciate giving everyone a full 2 weeks to look at that. I haven't had a chance to look at it yet. That's all. All right. Anything else? Good. So, do we then I don't think we need to approve the draft agenda, right?
No.
So we can just go on to board discussion, budget goals and priorities.
You have to approve the consent agenda.
We approved it.
You need the co-curriculum.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry.
The,
Oh.
thank you. Yes. Do I have a motion to approve the co-curriculars? We have to add the co-curriculars and then approve them, don't we? So a motion to add the co-curriculars.
It's a,
To the consent agenda?
Yeah.
Okay.
no, it's a-
We approved, that wasn't part of the consent agenda. So we need to add it. Yeah, we're gonna add
Add it
that.
and then approve the.
Yeah.
Agenda.
Is there any chance that you could speak up when you speak?
We have a motion to add co-curriculars to the consent agenda. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay. And then do I have a motion to approve the co-curricular figures?
Are we moving to approve the consent agenda?
Yes, thank you.
I move to approve the consent agenda.
Thank you.
I second. I approve.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you.
Sorry.
Yeah, I forgot about that. Board discussion.
So this is really, Jim, I'm not sure if you have things you want to start with. This is the board's opportunity to talk about community input. You got some brainstorming from the administration in your board packet as well. This is not designing the budget in any way. This is just talking about, from the board's perspective, what pieces of feedback you've heard that could be added to the agenda. Jim, do you want to add anything on to that?
No, I think I'm good. I'm looking forward to hearing about some of the great feedback people have heard, and I've had a bunch of community input and some good participation by both community members and students. So,
Sorry, Jim, I'm having a hard time hearing you. Can we put up your volume somehow?
Can we up the volume of the speakers maybe?
Sorry.
no worries. I said I'm good. I'm looking forward to hearing back on the feedback that people have heard from both community members and students over the last few weeks. But I don't think I have anything to add to the at least the first point of the board discussion.
So I have a report back that we hosted a listening session at Montpelier High School here in the library during Solon Block, which is sort of a block of time that they set aside for students to be able to like receive extra help from teachers, and they can sign themselves up for that block. So we put ourselves on the agenda in the library as just an open listening session around the budget for students. And we had 30 students sign up. So
Wow.
it was a packed room, if you can imagine, 30 chairs in a circle in here. And a big group of kids from the Ethnic Studies and Social Change group came really well organized and prepared. They had handouts that I can pass around. And so they have budget priorities that I think Amanda also emailed you a copy of this in your email. There was a lot of great ideas generated. They're pretty focused on a few things. There was feedback around wanting a student-centered space at the high school. They talked about other local schools that have that sort of thing. One of the students had also attended Twinfield and talked about a student-centered space that they have at Twinfield High School. And I know I used to work at U32. They had a big senior lounge there with ping pong tables and stuff in there. So they talked about wanting a space to be collaborative, maybe like art gallery space, a place to sort of decompress and work together and relax them in their off time. And they feel like the library really is like a designated workspace that should remain quiet, and that maybe some sort of student-centric space could allow for more collaboration and talking. They're interested in the district hiring an equity coordinator. They talked about, you know, the need for a central person to sort of be in charge of a lot of the DEI efforts of our district. They talked about the goal of becoming net zero and wanting to see more action on that. There was a point made about the athletic trainer, wanting that to become a full-time position, which I believe Libby responded to and said that that is in the works. They talked about equity in the sport budget and talked about some of the fields and in particular the track, and wanting that to be, you know, on par with some of the other facilities in the area, and wanting to primarily, they talked about it being safe for kids to practice and run on. There was a great testimony around uniforms, and I don't know much about the issue, so I can't speak to it personally, but they said that many of the girls' teams have outdated uniforms. The example was given of white shorts that aren't functional for girls of that age, or maybe any age. So potentially looking into investing in better or different uniforms. There was some complaints about like the sort of ranking of different sports teams, and that some teams appear to have better funding and that other teams don't have as much. There was a student who spoke about the desire to have DEI training for this. So this is not this was not a student that was involved in that group. DEI training for all. Amy talked about, you know, bus drivers and food service people and all the employees in the district. I have a feeling that we could probably speak on that. I think some of the trainings do cover all staff, right? They talked about a humanities curriculum overhaul, that there's still some very outdated curriculum that is very white centered, and they felt that really the only class that they can rely on to get a variety of perspectives is a class in type that they refer to as ethnic studies. Post-high school guidance, that they feel like the two guidance counselors are really strapped for time, and it's hard to get a lot of help with the details needed to like apply for college or make a post-high school career plan. Proficiency-based grading consistency, mental health support. They talked about, and some people stayed back and talked to Andrew and I about the tech center. Many of the concerns that they brought to the table around the tech center probably would be addressed in the work that Jill and Jody are doing. I think that's it for my notes, and then you have the packet in front of you, but it was a really rich conversation. It moved quickly. There was a lot of feedback. It was clear that the students in this building are very interested in engaging with us, and it seemed like the listening session during Solon Block was a really good opportunity for that. A few students stayed back and expressed interest in applying for the student representative position. So I think we're gonna, you know, we talked about doing with Matt McLean, we talked about doing the listening sessions at least monthly. So I think he proposed a calendar for that. And so we'll probably move forward with doing the sessions monthly. I highly recommend if any of you can attend. It was just really great to have the energy of the students and, you know, boots on the ground, what they're experiencing. And that level of feedback was really great to hear. Andrew, do you have anything to add on that?
I think you did a really good job. The only thing, and really comprehensive job. The only thing that I would add is on the tech center piece. The only thing that I would add is on the tech center piece, which is we received a bit of feedback, and I broke the tech center feedback into two areas, and I directed students to you, Jill, just so you know. I let them know that you're our point person for the tech center effort. And I'd say students raised the concern that with tech center course offerings, it felt like it was all or nothing at all. There wasn't an opportunity for more of a hybrid curriculum. And then there was also a concern raised that I think it stems from that approach that then students feel when they do take tech center courses that they feel very disconnected from the school here and the community here. And so those were 2 points that resonated with me on the tech center piece. And then one other piece on post high school that we heard from several students was they'd like to know that they'd like more guidance on alternative post-college career tracks that don't involve college or maybe involve college later on. That's all that I've got.
And my plan, I just haven't realized this plan yet, is to fill out Amanda's form that she so graciously created and input all of my notes into her form, which I think is really great. And I've been looking at some of the feedback that Kristen and Rhett have been putting in there from Roxbury too. So it's nice to be able to access that feedback. So I will put all of this into that form.
And
So-
so the goal with that form is that at the end, I can create some of the themes and be able to share out back to the community to say, this is what we have gathered input from.
One other takeaway that I had that I mentioned that I'm thinking back. After we met with the students, or when we were meeting with the students, it dawned on me that the board and the district are working on many of the issues that students want us to be working on. And I think there's an opportunity for us to better communicate that to students and show, where we're working on those issues, and then get feedback from them about, kind of how to build on those assets, how to build on.
That was part 2 of my plan that
Yeah.
also hasn't been realized. That I did collect emails from the students that were in attendance. So I'm hoping to at least report back directly to them, giving sort of like a rundown of where we're at on some of the issues that they brought to us.
Anybody else have anything? I know there was some tabling this past weekend at the Fall Festival.
In costume.
Well, and Ray and Kristen have done some Roxbury. Do you wanna?
Yeah, I think, Brad, did you report out? We haven't done anything, I think, since the last board meeting, other than you being at the table here in
Okay.
Montpelier. And I think you gave a synopsis from at the last meeting that I was absent from. So we could
Yeah.
talk about it again if needed.
Oh, I mean, I wasn't here, so
Oh,
you guys
okay.
already talked about it. That's
Yeah.
fine.
I mean, the main takeaways, I think, are, like I think you would find in any community, there's always a mix of experiences, that the students and families are having with the school. I think some big takeaways were a desire to see some more intentional integration of our elementary age kids in Roxbury with the UES students, and especially as we've sort of acclimated to, this virtual world, that kids could be doing kind of like, parallel studies of sorts, and really kind of trying to draw the connections and the similarities between the communities versus really emphasizing how different the communities are, because that's certainly a bit of a narrative, that goes around, and there's also some truth to it. There's just being more of an Vermont urban, town versus like a very rural town. So I think just the desire so that when kids arrive at Main Street Middle School from Roxbury, they don't feel like they've been dropped into an alien world, and that they ideally have some social connections. They feel, they have a sense of their community and part of it, and not different coming in. So that was pretty salient. We did hear a fair amount of feedback of wanting to see, outdoor education happening at RVS, the desire to see a structure put up in the RVS schoolyard. So that would really lend itself to kids truly, doing the active learning in the outdoor setting. You all have visited, but I think it's mostly been dark, or we haven't had the chance, but the schoolyard has an incredible garden. And it's just a really lovely setting. And so folks really interested in kids getting access to that and being able to learn. outside. There was also feedback about wanting RVS to be able to be more of a central community gathering space, because Roxbury doesn't have a whole lot of downtown infrastructure where people can gather and kind of build community connections. There was a feeling that if community members could access the school outside of school hours to have different community functions, that it would kind of be more of a heartbeat of the town, which would be really beneficial to taxpayers and community members. And those are the big ones that are sticking out in my mind.
One thing that I didn't mention at the previous, when I kind of brought things up previously, there has been discussion about the possibility of sort of rejuvenating the library. The actual library space itself is a little bit in need of some more attention, maybe some sort of a redesign. I don't know exactly what that would look like or who would be responsible for such a thing. There has been discussion among PTO in the past about trying to reach out to different organizations that might be able to provide some design ideas, and so there's some hope to make the library just a little bit more modern, something closer to what we have here, maybe. I don't know if it's quite the same, but that certainly is an opportunity.
So we can talk about the Sunday. We had a tabling at the Fall Festival. Do you wanna summarize?
Well, we had, I don't know, by the end of it, maybe, well, we had a couple of dozen conversations with folks. And we, it was actually really fun to talk to the younger kids who were there and to hear what the best thing about school was and what they would change. There was a lot of just social, when you ask what's the best thing about school, friends came up a lot for kids in elementary school, which really, hit home for me. And then, we got what I would consider a pretty typical response of what would you change about school. One of them was ice cream for lunch. And then, so one of the other things that stood out to me was actually asking for more athletic opportunities. We didn't get into a lot of specifics because they, went on their way, but that one was also very interesting to me. I think it was an older elementary school kiddo who was saying, I really would like a chance to have, I don't know what it would look like exactly, organized sports or whatever, but that one also stood out to me. I'm sorry, one other thing that stood out was not exactly like budget related feedback, but we got a lot of feedback of gratitude for everything that the district is doing and acknowledgement of how challenging it is right now, and just and a lot of gratitude for everybody, teachers, administrators, everyone. So that feels important to pass on as well.
Well, I heard a lot of kind of like the same conversations. There was conversation about mental health, about special ed, and just family struggles with their kids with IEPs and 504 plans. So there were a few conversations like that. There were conversations about equity in sports for kids from Roxbury, and how hard it was. Like some of them, there's a family that really wanted soccer, which I've heard before too, but can't be because they don't have transportation. So I don't know how it works, but that came out. Too much screen time for UES, that came out a couple of times, that they wanted to lower that. Don't remember. So I have the notes. So we had like post-it notes. Mia did a great job putting some info. So I have to just put that in the form. And it was Sunday.
I left the poster boards in my car in Roxbury.
Oh,
I can
it's
write
okay.
everything verbatim right into your
I
document.
took pictures of it, so
And that
I can do it. I took pictures of the
Okay.
posters.
Sorry about that.
Do you want anything to add to that?
No, there were the concerns about special education resources were challenging to discuss. People feeling like the support that their kiddos were getting were not what they hoped. Those were, there were 2 or 3 people that separately expressed some concerns there. I asked if there were staffing shortages communicated, or what they might, whether they were able to be more specific about what the challenges were, and they weren't sure why they didn't feel like the support was as they would hope that it would be. But those stand out to me.
Yeah, I heard a lot of what we've heard before, and this was new people from the 2 times that we've had those conversations around literacy, for example. So I think part of it was the testing outside of the challenging of trying to find testing outside of the process that happens, and how long it took them, and how much pushing they had to do. But we didn't get, we're just listening. So there was no conversations, just listening to what they have to say, but kind of falls into those pockets of usual conversations. Oh, it happens. It's kind of like the same packets of other conversations we've had. So
It was fun.
yeah. it was fun.
Did you wear the bee costume?
I did,
You did.
representing
Did
RPS.
anybody get a picture of him?
Yeah.
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 Yeah,
He
he's got
sent
it.
it my way so it could go up on the website.
Yeah, that should be your photo
The
on the board,
social
on the
media.
board page.
You didn't see
We can
Libby on that one?
crash.
I didn't see it, no.
So that's it for listening sessions, right? So I just spent a lot of hours translating for the multilingual families. So now I have translations of a flyer for 10 languages. I'm just waiting for Korean, and that's it. I've created a form so that people can request the translation. And so I'm gonna, I don't know, Libby, if you want me to send this to you, or if I can send to Sylvia to do. So I'm gonna take those flyers, and most of the ELL comments, from my understanding, are at UES. So I'm gonna ask some of the caregivers if they would help me flyer them in the morning drop off. But so that's with that, and so I'm hoping to schedule some of those meetings. I was gonna ask, so there's 5 affinity spaces that I'm trying to come up. The BIPOC affinity space, they're trying to come up with their schedule. There's a few parents from the UES Equity Committee who have agreed to help kind of facilitate that process. Sarika Tandon, which is used to be in the District Equity Committee, is gonna help facilitate that one. I asked Deborah Lisa Baker, who's from just a famous disability rights advocate, to support with the affinity space for the disability group, or like families with IEPs and 504 plans. Then I haven't asked outright, but I was planning to ask outright to facilitate the LGBTQ plus affinity space. Then what am I missing?
Multilingual.
The multilingual, I'm kind of helping and to all the communication, but I need support from the administration, whether it's with Sylvia or like you guys let me know. Because I have all the forms so that people can request, and I can help facilitate the interpretation once I know when people sign up. So that's that. But we had a couple of people on Sunday that wanted to be informed about that as space. I think that's it.
Literacy was the other
Oh,
one. you had
literacy,
written up on
yes.
Sunday.
There's a few parents that have a literacy group, and I have been in conversation with them, and I'm hoping they kind of lead that conversation. And so,
And is this with regard to the budget in particular, or is this just with regard to community input even?
I think with all the community input. I mean, when I created this, because the deadline for budget is October 20th, that is now really realistic to do all of this work, but that it's an ongoing. And that if we get some of those bits and pieces for the budget, right, but
Yeah, I know Emma and I were talking before, and Emma, I think you proposed it to the students, meeting with them on like a bi-monthly cycle with different focuses when we were meeting about.
That was the listening session. So yeah, it's actually gonna be monthly.
Monthly. Okay.
Yeah.
Anything else? All right, does anybody, we've talked about community input, does anybody wanna touch on the forecasting brainstorm file from the administration? We wanna just move on to expanding voting for non-citizens.
I just have a question on, and we were sort of getting to this of like what, when you asked Amanda about the affinity spaces, just to make sure I understand how what we've gathered so far gets incorporated into the process. You know, Libby, you and the administrators, the leadership team have had your initial conversations. Are you using anything that we've brought in so far in those conversations? And then I guess I'm also curious, and this is more of a question for the board, how do we use what we're hearing to help continue to shape the budget as we move through the process?
So a couple things I'm thinking about, several things that were talked about aren't actually budget items.
Right, right.
They're different items.
Yep.
They're for a different bucket.
Yep.
Right, so thinking about what's an actual budget item and what's not is important. And then so the other thing I think about is what Andrew said earlier about the students, and that a lot of things that are happening currently are in process, you know, so we use literacy for example. We're working with Teachers College Reading and Writing Project for first instruction around writing. We chose writing first, which influences reading, and also we use the ARP IDEA grant that we received to get training in for our special educators around multisensory instruction and Martin Gillingham's kind of programmatic needs for special education. So there are some things happen, you know, with that level of detail in terms of what exactly the professional learning is. The board should be really cognizant that that level of detail is not part of the budget presentation to the board, right? And that's under professional learning. You'll see a big professional learning bucket. But in the budget presentation, you don't necessarily see a detailed way of how that's broken out. Does that make sense? If the board wants a detailed presentation about how that's broken out after the fact, after we get the budget passed, then by all means ask for it. We can get that, right? When we have it. So there's just some things that I'm thinking about of how do we rather grant myself, and I know grants do the same thing. How would the board like us to present the budget? Because typically that level of grain size does not happen during budget presentations. So there's several things that I'm kind of thinking about with that.
so I understand like the big budget, but so how do we take community input and say, here are the concerns of the community and here are the buckets? I don't, you know, like, if we can say, here's the budget and we are gonna spend 20% on mental health to make sure that, you know, like, I just think that budgets need to, like, we need to be able to see in the budget, I don't need numbers, like, we're gonna hire 3 full-time people for this, but like big picture ideas, like, okay, here's some themes that are coming up. Special ed concerns, right? Like, how do we basically tell the families, here are your concerns, and here's some ways that our district is tackling this. And it's really important. Everything's money. Everything costs money. So everything is budget. the granular things we don't care, but we do, like, budget does paint a picture of where the money goes. So like we can say full-time staff, but like in here you have human resources infrastructure. I will also would love to see, you know, like here are the buckets, mental health, you know, literacy, special ed, so that we can tell the community, here are your concerns that we are putting our resources there, especially when it comes to this infrastructure conversation too. Like we need to be able to show the whole picture. Right now, seeing the pieces for me is a little bit, I won't be able to, yeah, I'm a complete picture person. So it's hard for me to take this piece and know that there's, I don't know how this is being taken care of.
At a board level, I think we're in the process right now of gathering this information, right, from all of these different constituencies and stakeholders. And I think, and we have this great forum to organize ourselves around it, which is really important to organizing this information. And I think our next step as a board, once we collect this information, is really to bucket it. And then for us to then, you know, present that to Libby and Grant and say, can you explain how we're going to achieve this goal, or how are we going to make progress on this issue that's been identified as a systemic community issue that affects all of these different students and families. From my perspective, I think we have some organizational work to do to kind of translate that over to the administration. Like we have some lifting to do, rather than, because right now and I think this is great, we're sharing all of these ideas. And I think, and I'm open to suggestions, but it seems to me, well, what do people think about as a next step, organizing that, and then kind of having the administration tell us what progress, what we're doing already and what progress they see this budget helping us achieve in those areas.
I think that makes a lot of sense, Andrew. And I also think we don't have to, we're kind of iterating on this process for the first time this year by involving community listening sessions so much earlier in the process. And so it makes sense to me that we don't know exactly how we're gonna communicate it back out or exactly what to do with it just yet, because we're figuring it out as we go, and that's okay. And I do like that idea, Andrew, of we get it organized. And I remember something similar to this, Libby, in last year's budget, but I might be making it up where, and Grant, you can also correct me if I'm wrong, but there was there was programming, and you did get to a somewhat level of detail within programming. So that might be one of those places where we could say, okay, I see you have programming as a budget, and we've been hearing a lot about special ed. Could we just dig right into that one and say, here's what we spent last year on special ed, here are changes we're making to that to address concerns, you know, or whatever. That's just taking Andrew's idea maybe one step further as an idea for how to communicate this kind of thing.
And you're right, the budget gets broken down a couple ways, but I think we focus mostly on by program. So it would be like special education, co-curriculars. So it makes sense if we would do it kind of the same way. That's what the public is used to.
Yeah.
Maybe what we can, and we also always show staffing adjustments budget to budget. So we'll always be clear about what those are. But I think if we do have buckets, then maybe that's something that could be an addition this year, is maybe by topic, another slide that addresses the, you know, a certain bucketed area. And we can maybe talk about what's included in the budget. Maybe not at the granular level, but maybe at least to give people more of an idea of this topic would include these kinds of resources that are in the budget or that have been added to the budget. So if we have buckets and there's a reasonable number of them so that we don't overwhelm people during budget presentations, then maybe Libby and I can look at that and try to figure out the best way to present that.
And Grant, remind me when, for lack of a better term, because it's been a long day, the budget needs to be cooked, when we need to get it to the town offices.
Early to mid-January, I believe it has to be approved. There's a statutory limit on the days whenever it can be warned. So I would I don't know the exact date, but my guess would be probably somewhere like around January 10th, maybe, would
Right.
be the day whenever it has to be approved and the articles have, the warning has to be approved with all the articles.
So the reason why I asked Brent that question is because, you know, you have 2 board meetings a month. And you have 1 left in November and you have 2 in December, which are dedicated to budget. And you'll have 1 that you have to vote on. Yes, this is the budget we're gonna send to the voters, the first January meeting.
Mhm.
So there
That's
are,
4. 4 left.
yes, thanks, 4 left that has time for, because, well, 3 really, because next meeting is not a budget.
Right.
You know, we'll present the first draft of the budget, and that's what it is a draft for the board to say, no, go back and think of this, right? On December 1st. So I just want the board to keep that in mind, that we can change that presentation however you'd like. And it's not the end all be all, right? So when we present the budget, there's also time well within your prerogative to say, Libby, we'd like a presentation about special education and what you're doing with special education. Please bring Bill Dyson to help. That's absolutely wonderful. We'd love it, right? Libby, talk about the professional development that's happening in literacy. But that may not be connected to the budget presentation, however. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That may be after the budget, because y'all have 3 board meetings to figure out the budget.
Yeah.
Because there's statutory time limits that we're talking about. Am I making sense?
Emma, and Joe.
So yeah, I'm just thinking in relationship to the student listening session, there was so many things discussed. I would never expect you to put all of those things in a budget presentation. But it would be nice for me as a representative to be able to get back to them eventually, like Andrew and I talked about, which I think is more of like a collective effort to say where we've made progress on certain things. And then if there's something that we know is gonna be in the budget, potentially that was one of their top issues, I would want to report that back to them. But I think it's gonna be pretty straightforward. And you both do such a good job usually of highlighting the big changes, and I feel like it's pretty user friendly to be able to see, you know, where the major changes are happening. I had a question, so maybe.
Can I
if
ask you
Jill-
one question about that? I'm
Yeah.
sorry to
Yeah.
interrupt you, but, so I'm just curious from the board's perspective, one of the things that was in the student presentation was like the equity coordinator. That is not currently something that's on the administration's list to include. It's not included in any kind of
Yeah.
big time draft we got going, which are big time drafts.
Yeah,
Right now that we have going on. So if the board wants, like, that's something the board needs to discuss. It's a position. So you're talking about over $100,000. If you want that in the budget,
right,
please let us know now, right? That's a priority for the board,
yeah,
because we haven't prioritized a position like that. We've prioritized equity in other ways, of course, but not a position.
Yeah, I mean-
So that would make us rethink several things that we're thinking about at the administrative level, because it's a large dollar.
yeah. I mean, I can only speak as an individual to that.
I didn't mean to have you answer it, and I was saying that's a really good
Yeah.
example of, like, we want to speak towards that, or why it wasn't in the budget, but
Yeah,
you know what I mean? We need to have a conversation
I
about
would
that.
picture being able to report back to the students on the other ways that we're addressing diversity, equity, inclusion in the current school budget as you've imagined it. And then saying, like, you know, to me, that is a great idea, and it's something that we could like start thinking about for potentially the following budget. So I don't have any major surprises for you in store in that, personally, in that regard. But I do think it's important for us to be able to report back to stakeholders when they voice their
Yeah.
concerns. to
Yeah,
us.
absolutely. I think in the future, it's those kind of things are budget decisions, right? Uniforms, not really connected to the budget too much. Like, there's a cycle for uniforms there. You know, the students just might not know that.
Yeah,
We certainly can make them non-white. Here, you know, the pants not white, right? But that kind of thing is a good budget topic for the board to hash out and things, and should happen prior to November 3rd.
I had a question on the brainstorming document that you gave us. So Jill, if you want to speak to this current conversation before I move on to that. Go ahead.
Mia also had her hand.
It was really quick, but I have to jump.
I forgot what I was gonna say.
It'll come back to you. It'll come back to you.
Mia?
I was just gonna piggyback off of what Emma said, where she said, I totally agree, we should be going back to stakeholders, especially when 30 students show up for a listening session. But even if it was one, also, we should get back to that person. And sometimes when we are going back to stakeholders, we're gonna have to say, these are the hard decisions we had to make, and this is what isn't gonna happen. So it's a little bit like Libby was just saying, we're probably not going to see a district equity coordinator as a personnel decision made this year in this budget. And, that's just also part of our job as community representatives, is to go back and say, this didn't make it, but let's keep the conversation going. Let's see how we can achieve these goals in other ways.
Right?
We have a number of specific, forgive me for not fully understanding. We have a number of committees. Not any of them necessarily speak to identifying what buckets the community is seeking. What mechanism does the board have as a whole outside of these meetings to identify the buckets that the community is most interested in? It seems like that's almost its own committee, but it's an everyone committee, which isn't, there is no mechanism for that I am aware of. So is there a tool that the board could utilize to get our heads together to identify buckets that essentially might color code the budget? Like, I'm looking at this and I'm thinking of color coding certain items that are trying to address the concerns that are being brought to the board. It's in there. It's just not identified necessarily yet, but we haven't either identified the priorities, which is, I don't know if that's budget or if that's vision or what, but I don't know what mechanism the board has to get together and identify those themes.
If we're not meeting as a quorum of the board, there's all sorts of work that's being done, right? Like Amanda took the initiative and has been taking the initiative on the translations, as well as the outreach, as well as putting together this great form for this process, which is awesome. Emma, for example, has, and I'm trying to support her, has been doing a bunch of work on the student engagement front. Those aren't part of committees, right? So we don't necessarily need formal committees to do the type of work that you're talking about. For example, Rhett, if you have the bandwidth, I'm sure Amanda would appreciate the assistance sifting through the information that's coming through on these forums, and you could put together, these are the big items that we're seeing, and share that with the board, and we can have a conversation about it. That's my general thought. Sometimes it almost feels like if we have too many committees, we're over formalizing our processes, and we might be adding a little more grit than we need to. I don't know if anybody has.
Yeah, that was the whole intention of that
Oh.
form, I was going to, but I will love your help. I was
like to
coming
help.
up with taking it all in, putting it in a document, breaking out in themes, and then having a discussion here in one of the meetings.
And for future reference,
Yeah.
like if we had started the listening sessions in August or September,
Yep.
we would be in a much better position now to be identifying priority themes for real budget consideration. I don't feel at this point, it's great to identify the themes, but it's going to be sort of a last minute dash if we actually want to add.
When
some
you
of
want
those.
to dig into it, right?
Yeah.
Like special education as a theme is a pretty big theme.
Right.
Right? Like what exactly are we talking about there?
Right.
I think Jim wanted to jump in.
Yeah, I just want to kind of make the point. I think it's following up on what Libby was saying. I think for some of these buckets, it's really important for us to ask the administration for kind of a complete picture of what they're thinking, because while the dollars definitely matter, I also think some of the systematic and programmatic changes that they're making matter as much, and understanding that at a board level is really important, because some of the fixes and some of the improvements aren't necessarily throwing more monetary resources at it. It's using the existing resources differently. It's building systems differently. So I think getting the administration to talk to us about special ed, about mental health support, et cetera, kind of from the systematic and programmatic view they're looking at it would really be important. And obviously it's a little late in the budget process now, but I think kind of asking them when they do present the budget, those questions about, how do these investments support the programs and systems you have in place, rather than just kind of do you need more? So I just wanted to throw that out. And I think those would be great presentations for after the budget as well.
Yeah, and as a add-on to that, I love it. If you said, I'd love a presentation on special education lib, I'd love a presentation on social emotional supports, that's great. That's really welcome, so by all means.
Amanda?
And I think thinking holistically is about not only the presentation to the board, but the presentation to the community that is concerned about this issue. So coming up with those questions, okay, how are we actually addressing this? Because I think the fact that we're doing the community listening sessions and being able to respond to them is being able to invite them to the table and say, here, we heard you and here's what we're doing. So that, because then if it's just us hearing from the presentation and not really doing the outreach to bring the community to engage in what is happening, so that it is not, it is not only our job as a board to be the conduit to the community, but for us to start engaging so that people are aware of what's happening, right? Information gets lost and people so it's how do we do both? How do we actually be the conduit so that they're here with us? And so that we're not double doing the same thing over again every year. So we had community listening sessions in August, and then towards the end of the year, that can help us build. We have 2 sessions with these pockets of people.
Jill had her hand up.
I remember.
Right. Please.
So real quick, this has been fantastic and really helpful for me to get my brain wrapped around it. I'm sorry I haven't been able to make more of these. I do definitely want to go to the high school one next time. I had a class that afternoon.
You've been busy cleaning our schools, I'm sure.
And I'm really blown away by what they pulled together. So I really want to make sure that we do respond to them like you guys have been saying. And I think a lot of it comes down to just, we want to be able to sort of stand behind and present and explain our budget in a way that we can point to how it reflects the values of our community and how we've heard those things. And I do feel like in the past, when things have come up, what's been incredibly helpful, and 9 times out of 10, there's already, the folks working in our schools and our administration are actively addressing those things, but we may not have made that connection yet. So I love the idea of hearing. I'm not asking you for any presentation or anything until we at least get 50% of our 5 to 11-year-olds vaccinated or something, but I'm not asking Libby to do anything. But I do think that I would like to be able to look at, and I know that it is reflected in the budget when folks are going to town meeting day, that we have heard this input and we are reflecting those values. And I have absolute confidence that they are the shared values of our staff and our administration and our board, but we need to be able to make that connection for folks. So I do think we've heard a lot. I'm still very cognizant of the very sort of immediate visceral concerns right now with COVID and the stress and anxiety and the behavioral challenges and the staffing challenges. So I don't think that's a new thing, but I have no doubt that there are things being done in the short and longer term to try to contemplate that and address that. That's an example of something I bet is reflected in our budget or reflected in our operations, but we might just need to be able to better explain it. And that just might come from being on your board too. But if we sort of break those things out into pieces, I do think we can actually address a lot of those concerns about how they're already being addressed by our staff.
And I think I'm wondering too, because I think there's a lot of really important things being said right now, and it seems like this community outreach initiative is kind of on fire, and it's really gaining momentum, and it's really happening. And like you said, I mean, we really kind of need to figure out a way now how to get ourselves organized. And I am also wondering, does it make sense to kind of capture all this in some sort of a community outreach plan? It's like a living document, but it really sort of, and I especially think about this from the perspective of a new board member, newish, that if I had come on and kind of knew that this was, both like, you know, the spirit of the work of being a board member, it would have been nice to like see that. And I realize that this work is also very new, but if it could be contained in one place and kind of spell out, you know, what the intent and the purpose of the work is and kind of a bigger picture. But then also, you know, if we could break down, you know, if we could look at, you know, the budget calendar that Grant provides us with kind of the milestones and the deadlines and match up with that, the community outreach plan that needs to be framed around that. So we're not kind of coming to this last minute, like, oh, you know, it's December, maybe we want to consider this, but that we're really just that much more organized and that we have some mechanisms of, you know, around community accountability. And that's just like spelled out for us as a board. And I don't know what that would look like. I don't know if it's a committee, if it's a document, if it's a just, you know, a guide or a best practice piece, but I think it would be nice to get it all in one place and knowing that it's going to, that it's a new initiative and that it's going to evolve. But I think it's been really fruitful so far. I think it's, you know, and I think it really connects back to, we did quite a bit of work, you know, a few months ago about just what does it mean to be a board member, and this piece was really highlighted in terms of how we are the conduit and the bridge between the community and the schools, and how that really allows us to kind of fulfill that essential purpose and work. So I'm not putting that on any particular person, but I would be happy also, Amanda, to help kind of pull information together and start to kind of organize and codify and whatever it takes, and maybe that can help kind of, you know, funnel into what that document or whatever it is, you know, that might, what it might be.
I think it fits, can I say something? It fits into last 2-4 minutes ago, we talked about having the template for new board members, you know, so that people like, and so that fits really nicely into that. And so I'll be willing to work with you on that. Maybe next time. But yeah, like just trying to come up with some visioning of what a tool document will look like and incorporating all of that.
I wanted to shift gears to the document that you provided. Is it okay to do that now? Are people feeling? So, I mean, this is really exciting because I feel like in this document is reflected all of the public feedback that we've received over the past year. You know, a lot of the stuff that we've heard from the community and from our listening sessions, a lot of it is already aligned with this initial sort of peek into what the administrative team is thinking for the budget. And so I did have a couple of questions on it. One of the things that popped out at me was the Union Elementary School 1.0 school counselor. Is that in addition to Suzanne Frankie?
Yeah, anything on, these are all ads.
I mean, that's incredible. That's like an incredible ad. I'm really supportive of that and excited about that. I think her student baseload is really, really high, and it's been voiced here at these meetings in the past. And I think that's a super exciting addition to the budget. Another question that I had was in MSMS. Could you just explain a little bit about the decrease PE and music increase? I wasn't quite following all of that. Figure out how not to share staff with music and health.
Yeah, so remember that these are our brainstorms.
Yeah.
One of the significant challenges that we have between the high school and the middle school is that it shares the music staff. So our band teacher, our chorus teacher, and our orchestra teacher are in both buildings, right? So, and that's a significant part of the MSMS specials rotation. So because we have to share them, and it doesn't make sense for them to go back and forth multiple times during the day, they're at this year MSMS in the morning and MHS in the afternoon, which essentially creates a situation where the middle school schedule has to have all their specials in the morning. And then the teachers are like, by the end of the day, because all the core content has to be at the end of the day, which isn't great for kids either, by the way, right? And every year it's a conversation of the shared staff piece.
Yeah.
Every single year, it's like, how do we do this in a way that makes sense for kids and it makes sense for the adults? Like, it just shouldn't. We're trying to figure out how not to share staff. between the two buildings because it really creates scheduling difficulties for both buildings.
Yeah,
And so currently at Main Street, currently there's 3.0 FTE for PE at Main Street. And so we're thinking, do we need 3.0 PE at Main Street, or could we do something differently with that that number? So it's budget neutral almost, right? To think of that differently. Could we add a music appreciation course at Main Street Middle School that, so we could say to seventh graders, you have to take band, orchestra, chorus, or music appreciation, right? Like there's no study hall there anymore. So we're thinking about those kind of pieces of how can we create different opportunities for kids and not share staff. So that's what that's all about.
okay. So in that thinking, I'm just gonna put in a plug for what reflect back to you stuff that I've heard from the community for many years. And I've been in the thick of it because my kids have been at the middle school for this will be the 5th year. The health education at the middle school has been a really huge concern for parents over the past like 5 years. And if there's any way that you can sort of work in somebody who really is an expert with health education into those 3 FTEs somewhere.
Well, remember we increased health last year from 0.5 to 1.0.
Yeah, and were they shared?
Yes,
Right.
they're shared staff now too.
So however, I have faith that it's on your radar already, but just want to make sure that I put in another plug for, I see the music and the PE and then how not to share staff with health, but health is a huge priority, I know, with parents, health education there.
I know we had a curriculum director working really diligently with the community group on that when the pandemic hit, and that
Yes.
curriculum director is currently serving as our middle school principal. So.
And they adopted a great new health curriculum, and that was a budget line item, increase for this school year, which was an amazing win for the work that the parents have done to advocate for that. But I just, in this sort of shifting FTEs around, if there's any, I would just want that to be on the forefront of people's minds.
And I did want to reiterate what Libby said in case you missed it. I mean, this is a brainstorm. I don't want you to think, oh, that counselor position, that's great. It's in
We're
the
putting
budget.
everything in there.
It's not yet. I mean,
Yeah.
we still are working through.
I wanted
this.
to highlight the counselor position as a really amazing idea that I know has had wide support with all of the social emotional, there was a letter that we received that was signed off by how many local mental health
About
workers?
40.
How many?
About 40.
About 40. And the testimony that we received around that time, I mean, it was sort of COVID related, but it was about being concerned about kids' mental health. And I know just anecdotally from my own experience with my kids that it's very challenging for a child to get an appointment with Suzanne Frankie because she has like a huge caseload. It's 400 plus students for one guidance counselor. That ratio is hard. So I just wanted to like elevate that as something I'm super excited about and hope that that's in there.
Go ahead, Wanda.
Go ahead.
Oh, so just a few questions to just again, more to understand what I'm looking at. The advisor and coach positions, do you consider those co-curriculars or co-curriculars, not FTEs? And there's under many things, there's these little asterisk notes like in infrastructure plan and planned in facilities budget. Does that mean that those are wish list items for this budget, but don't necessarily get into this budget because they're covered in another way? So
Yeah.
yeah,
So I added those in for the boards, just for the board's understanding.
Yep.
In that, that some of, the things that you see in the bigger font, if you will.
Yep.
Those were the things that were on the whiteboard, right? So I told you, we're in the room over there, the whiteboard's covered with lots of writing and all that kind of stuff, when we're brainstorming. Those were the pieces on the whiteboard. I transposed them into a table for myself, really, as we're thinking about how do we prioritize. And then some of the things we were thinking about or we've put in other places,
Yeah.
right? And so I just put little notes there, like the security cameras, lots of principals said security cameras. Well, they don't know what the security grant, at that point in the year, they didn't know what the security grant was gonna have, or the safety grant was gonna have, and Andrew and Grant had already talked about, yeah, we're gonna add security cameras, like that was already spoken of.
Right.
So, but that's not something you're gonna see in a budget presentation because it's in a grant.
Yep.
So yeah, that's just kind of FYI, this is where the funding is coming from that, you
Right.
know, and a lot of it, when they're when principals are brainstorming, they don't have the knowledge that Grant and I have around all the, you know, we've talked about it before.
Yeah.
The multiple grants that come into the district and what we can use them for,
Yep.
especially this year. So that's our job to
Yep.
say, okay, these were all the things that they want and they need. What are we prioritizing and what are the best funding sources for them? Is it a one-time thing? Is it something for the local budget? And you know, like all of those pieces. So
Yep.
that's our job, and Mike and Bill, of course, when
Yeah.
Mike is not principaling.
And in some cases, there's notes like you'll see under the high school, it says textbooks and the little note underneath it says in teacher budget lines. So what we're saying is if you do want to do this, that's where you should put it. And there's a book line for different grades or different subjects. So if you need textbooks, make sure you put it there.
So that's like back to
So
the
that's like a
principals.
note back to the
Yeah.
principal
Yep.
for the school,
Yep.
like, okay, if you need this, if this is important, make sure you put it there.
Yep.
Because I'm not gonna go in there and say, yeah, you know, textbooks, I think I should add $5,000 for social studies. I don't know that. They would know. So
Yep.
just, that's fine, and that's where you should put it if you need it.
Well, so it's very helpful for us to see, this is what essentially principals are asking for, and then also and not just principals, you both are in that conversation as well. And then those the like smaller font is like the beginning of the organizing of how it could be handled.
Yes.
My one last question is, I think I know the answers, but transportation IA, what is that?
So we have, particularly at the high school, we have with flexible pathways, particularly, the kids going this way or the other. And so transportation shouldn't be a hindrance for a kid's experience.
Yeah.
Also, we have students with special needs who go to different schools and locations and things like that throughout the day. And it's one of my pet peeves, I guess, for lack of a better way to explain it, to be using a faculty member to transport students when a person that person could be teaching, and sometimes they're transporting students instead for a large portion of their day. We can make that more efficient monetarily.
So it's an IA instructional assistant.
Yes.
Got it.
Yes.
Interestingly enough, Libby, that was discussed at the student feedback session after it was over with one of the people who came and talked to us about the frustration of having one of the staff teachers be out driving students
Yeah.
when they need to be meeting with
Good,
that
I should
staff
talk to that kid, because I agree.
Yeah.
I agree
It
with
was
them.
echoed by the students.
I just want us to be mindful, and I know, Amanda, you know, I'm gonna get to you in a second. I just want us to be mindful that it's about 7:50 and we have 2 more bullet points before we get the policy, which is like great. If we're a little bit behind, I think it's all right, but I just want us to be cognizant of that. Amanda?
Annika, you had your hand up?
Oh, I'm sorry, Anna, I didn't see.
That's okay, no, I didn't raise my hand, but I had a question, I can go on to.
Go ahead.
Well, I had a general question, can you talk a little bit about professional learning, is that,
PD, professional development.
yeah, is that, I'm assuming this came from the principals and the, in general, teachers and whatnot? One of the questions I had was just a curiosity, what's MTSS?
Multi-tiered systems of support. So when I'm talking about our 4 pillars, that you see me talk about so much, that's essentially multi-tiered systems of support. That whole process, what they're probably speaking of there is the tiered system for remediation, intervention, and enrichment that we've talked about. Understanding that better, understanding how we design formative assessments, you know, understanding that whole process better.
So the items in the professional learning, is that like, how do they translate into project patterns? Is that we're sending teachers to, more professional learning, or is that?
or bring people in, or, that kind of thing. Yeah, so we've gone to, an example of that is the leadership team went to a national RTI is the same thing. So conference around multi-tiered systems of support, right? So the district paid for that to happen. So we, it looks like different things. Sometimes it's bringing people in, sometimes it's sending people out, and then turnkeying it in districts, depends on what the opportunity is. But you'll see it in a professional development line.
These are the additional things that just do the brainstorming.
No, these are beautiful. The beautiful thing about the professional learning lines, like the principals were saying, is just like year two of, like there's not a whole lot of newness in them because they're right on target with what we've been talking about.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to get.
Yeah.
at, is that this is continuation of what we've been talking about.
Yeah.
So there might be $65,000, say, in professional development district PD. It may still end up being that same dollar amount, but this might be what we use it for specifically versus something else. It could be used for different types each year, but it may not result in the budget going up necessarily. It may just be how we use the budget this year.
And that was another piece I was trying to think about is a lot, maybe I'm speaking of, a lot of these things are additional items. Professional learning may not be, is that correct?
Professional learning is more of, continuation. Because the worst thing we can do is change the professional learning for our teachers and our staff year to year, right?
Absolutely.
So we need to get our staff to the place where they own the literacy work we're doing, right? They own the math work that we're doing. Where if the consultant is no longer here, our teachers are still doing it and could teach it to others, to new teachers coming in, right? So we don't want to have that plate should not be overwhelming.
Yeah, I mean, one of the thought I had was, we need to be supporting our teachers. If they're asking for a lot of things, professional development.
Right now they're saying no.
Yeah, that's another piece that, we're in a different
Right.
space right now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we have a community liaison position. That's a full-time position?
Yes.
It's like thinking about bullying and harassment, that it has been a little bit of a topic out there in the community, bullying and harassment. And just like thinking about, is this position like to engage training with the community or create a specific, like trainings with the community or
think
trainings with the families that is outside of that.
That's a great thing to bring to the board to present about what Nick is doing right now. I think we've talked about that before. Right now, no. Right now, his primary responsibility is to be working with the families who have kids who are refusing to come to school. So he's pretty tied up in that right now. So I think over time, hopefully, if he's successful in his position, then yes, that's the vision for it right now.
Is there been ever a time where that happened in our history where there is a specific staff person that works as a liaison with the community to do trainings or get facilities?
That not in my tenure. That has not happened.
I remember attending just like, sometimes the parents groups would host
Yeah.
sort of sessions that are educational for the caregivers. And there's been a couple things related to that where someone from the school will come to speak to the Caregivers Alliance.
Thanks. And then thinking about the work that we did last year with the SRO and the school safety community, just like I know that there was that money moved, right? And you guys came up with some, not solutions, but some buckets and just thinking of continuation of that work. How do we do that work and then see it in this budget as something that was a community value, that was hard work And so how that is reflected, just thinking about that.
Yeah.
We made a shift, and so then what? Like what's next about that?
I will just say I did see a couple of things on this brainstorm that related to our work on the SRO, the School Safety and Police Relations Committee. One of the really exciting things that I saw, and I'm trying to find it, was it was restorative justice training. Where is it? It's in the high school one, right? Yep.
And we're paying for that work through Medicaid.
It's down further. It's on the second page. Okay, yeah. Restorative Practices Advisor, that was a huge point of discussion in our committee work, was restorative practices and how to improve the work that's already well on its way in the district, but to support it and improve it. And so seeing something like that in there is a direct reflection of, you know, the values of the work of that committee. So I'm and the counselor again was also another thing that was, you know, mental health support for kids was another thing that was a big topic of discussion in our committee.
It's also the professional learning for the middle school,
Yeah.
SEL/restorative.
Yep. And the work with the resiliency trauma with Joelle at Union Elementary.
And
So there's a bunch of stuff in here that is being asked for, the behavior support at Union Elementary.
And the seeing it in the professional learning, it feels like it's in line with, just like we were just saying, Libby, how we need the teachers to be able to fully own it so that there's not always a consultant on hand to support them. And I think having a restorative practices advisor in the high school seems really smart. And I like seeing that it in the professional learning column as well, to be increasing the aptitude and the capabilities of everybody.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks, Grant. Thank you for.
Thank
always-
you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Grant.
Thanks, everyone. So our second bullet under board discussion is expanded voting for non-citizens.
Yeah, and I can take this on. Let me know if you have trouble hearing me. So as you may know, the city of Montpelier expanded voting to non-citizens. I forget exactly how they did it. I think they had some permission from the legislature. Anyhow, I talked to John Odom, and he seems to feel that we could do the same thing, probably by action of the board. I think it would be something that we'd have to run by Pietro to get clarity on, because obviously we're a two-town district. But assuming Pietro says that that is something we could do, I just want to make sure the board is interested in expanding that. I think it would definitely be an equity issue, because there's obviously members of our community who are not citizens who have students in the school, you know, who pay taxes, et cetera. And be interested in following up on that. So I just wanted to throw that out there, get a blessing to go to Pietro, and if he says yes, we can do whatever we need to do to make that happen.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Considering it's being done at our municipal level too, there's this like gap. And I'm thinking about how this could be done equitably and consistently without that change. Because we approved the school budget articles as part of other voting.
Can you
as well.
speak up, Andrew? Sorry.
I was just saying it would improve the consistency of our ballot process in Montpelier as well, because otherwise you'd have to have like two separate ballots. I don't know how.
Right. Because the school budget is a line item on the regular ballot, so how would you pull that out
You'd have
and
to
have them not
two
be able to
ballots.
vote on that, but be able to vote on everything else?
I actually was under the misunderstanding that when this happened at the municipal level, it just translated over. to us
Right.
already. So.
Yeah, I'm 100% supportive. I think it's great.
Me too.
Yeah, and Andrew, I mean, the fact of the matter is there it might be happening anyways, at least in Montpelier, because of that.
Right.
This change that has kind of occurred for Montpelier, there has been some questions to me about how that affects Roxbury. So I may need some guidance and some help in sort of framing that conversation, I think, with people that, so I just want to put that out there that this decision was made in Montpelier. And I don't know how that affects the budget that Roxbury votes on. And I personally think it's great, but I need to represent our constituency and communicate as effectively as possible what this means. So I just want to share that.
I just want to say that the percentage of people that will be voting is very, very small. And as someone that was part of the campaign to get the non-citizen voting into the ballot in Montpelier, I think there's a lot of community members that can come and speak about it, that did a lot of the work. And that there's a few districts, well, I think Winooski, or was it Burlington? Winooski, where the school board. But I think that the thing to say is that we do have some community members, but it's very, very small percentage of people that will vote. And these are people who are either residents of, are here working, that have this status too. They're not undocumented, which was some of the concerns that I heard from. I would like to extend it to undocumented, but it's not extended to undocumented. So yes, I will be more than happy to connect you to the person who really organized and the campaign for
I'll be in
Montpelier.
touch, and
Yeah.
I'd want to communicate as effectively and clearly as I can.
Yes, yes.
It sounds like answers that Jim would get from Pietro would also
Yeah.
help with the specifics of what you're asking about, right?
I think there was a couple, there was like two prong from this individual that we got some feedback from. There was the question about, kind of an equity question of if we have non-citizens who are legal permanent residents, which I believe is the definition of a non-citizen, in Roxbury, but they haven't been granted the right to vote on the budget. So feeling like there's just some inequity and just sort of acknowledging that discrepancy. And then also that there was just some discomfort around, I think, a non-citizen voting on budgets that affect residents of Roxbury or students, that are coming from Roxbury. So just in terms of how we talk to Pietro or how we get some guidance, I think that was, there was, I think it was, also just a curiosity of could that sort of be extended to non-citizens of Roxbury, but it's a legislative action, is my understanding, that would need to take place. It's much more robust than saying, yeah, we would like to check that box on a ballot in the town votes.
And if they're voting, it's because they're paying taxes too.
What's that?
So they're also paying taxpayers in that
Yes,
town.
But I think some
and so,
education, yeah, would be
Yeah.
really
And
helpful
probably
so
have
that we can talk to folks about that.
And there's also, it's not even just any non-citizen, right? It's like, it's people who are on green cards, and there's, frankly, it's not as like open-ended as I've heard.
Just clarity.
Yeah, but it's great conversation, and if Pedro doesn't have, I think it will be great. Like there's a few people and lawyers that do this type of trainings or like conversations about it, and like to be able to show the big picture. So if we get there, then we can invite. I have a few people that can talk about, including ACLU, who can talk about the legalities of it too.
So if the school board votes and approves it, if that happens, does that affect I guess, is that the question, that the Roxbury non-residents, would they be affected by this decision? Would they be able to vote, or is it only for Montpelier non-citizen residents?
I think that's what Jim wants to find out.
Okay.
All right, green light, Jim.
Excellent, thank you.
Is it true, Jill? Do we go around, or the majority?
Apparently incapable of speech this evening.
Jill was up early with me. Sticking swabs of kids' noses.
All right, committee update, equity committee.
No.
Oh, me, okay. Equity committee update. Well, I think the last 2 to 3 months, the big push for us has been developing the equity policy review tool. And that has just been a big, heavy lift. And I think we feel pretty proud of that and are happy that it's moved on to the policy committee and will go before the board. And yeah, look forward to hearing feedback about that. It sounds like that's gonna be featured as a discussion point, 1 meeting from now, our next meeting. And up next, I think we put a little bit of time into defining the work of the equity committee. I'm trying to get the ball rolling with with committees really defining their purpose and their reason for being. So we're gonna be trying to finesse that and finalize that to get that where it needs to go. And what more? And then I think, we had started some survey work some time ago and really trying to reach out to the community. And we kind of quickly segued, into the policy tool. So we're going to be coming back into the community survey work that we started months ago. So that's more or less it.
That includes the teacher survey, right? That we worked on.
That one you and I were just working on wasn't really an equity committee thing,
Oh,
but
okay. Okay.
we could bring it in there.
We should, because we don't wanna be late like last year.
Right. We need to pick that back up.
I think that's it. Any
Thank you
questions?
so much for that policy review tool. It's really, really well done. I haven't used it yet, but I'm looking forward to using it. We talked about it at the policy committee today. And we're going to be using it for discussion around a new required policy that's coming down the pipeline from the VSBA on special education. So at our next meeting, we're going to be, all 3 of us, the committee members, are going to be using that tool to analyze that policy.
Awesome.
So thank you so much.
And we'll be talking more about that next time.
Yeah,
20 minutes,
definitely, thank you.
maybe 30.
20 minutes. Andrew's ready.
Right. Yes, policy readings, the 3rd reading. So we have the 3rd reading of fiscal management, which is EO1, budget execution, EO2, and animal dissection, GO5. And last time, Emma, I think you were the one who raised the question about the oral bids. So I corresponded with Grant on this, and I figured I'd just report back to everyone. So purchases, by statute, purchases less than $40,000 don't require bids. So the purchases over $40,000, bids are required, which means they do need to maintain bids as proof of compliance. But for purchases less than 40,000, it's oftentimes more efficient for them to make several calls to different bid. It depends on who they're calling for what. And so, if it was done by statute, they could do that and not even have any kind of written substantiation. But Grant, I think he put it in there, or it's in there, just so that there is that extra level of documentation, but the oral component is in there. Like our policy could be totally silent on it, and they could do that, but it's for transparency's sake that, if it's less than $40,000 and, you're in the middle of like a construction process and you need something, being able to call 2, 3 different vendors, it sounds like, provides them with a level. It streamlines the process and ensures that they can compare costs more quickly than they otherwise would be able to. It sounds like in some cases, people might just say, well, we're not going to submit a written bid for that, not worth it. So, and as we know from our recent experience, you don't always have the fortune of getting a bunch of bids when you have an RFP out there. So I found that explanation to be, I told him that I would prefer it being the way that it is now than to eliminate that language altogether, and that I don't think the board wants to hamstring the administration when we're in the middle of a project from comparing prices on different services and products.
Yeah, it's really good to hear that sort of like functional reasoning behind some of the language in these policies, because we don't interact with the language, so it's great to hear those stories.
But I too thought it was strange, so I was perfectly happy to follow.
Thank you for doing that.
You're welcome. So third reading, does anybody want to pull any of these? Does anybody have any questions?
So there's no changes. I'm not seeing any strikeouts.
No, and it doesn't mean, as we've discussed before, I know the policy committee at some point might on fiscal management or budget execution want to do a deeper dive. Finance committee might want to. There's nothing that precludes us from 6 months from now coming back, doing that deep dive and amending.
Yep.
This is just to ensure that we're compliant with federal and state laws.
You'll remember when I sent the board packet, at least I did this in my mind. At this point, could be wrong, but I said I took out the strikeouts and I added in the language because you've had 2 readings of it. So that's why the strikeouts aren't there like they have been.
She's accepted all.
Yeah, I accepted
Right,
all.
but I mean, so there was, from the last time that we read it and discussed it, there's no new
Right,
correct.
changes. Right, okay. I move that we, how do I do this motion?
I think
So it's just the third reading, and then next board meeting, you'll see those because there aren't any
in
significant changes.
consent.
You'll see them in the consent agenda as approve these 3 policies. And then once that happens, we'll update all of our stuff.
Great.
And in the past, I do want to just say with regard to like seminal, like bigger policies that we think are really important, like the equity policy was one. We didn't just approve that as part of the consent agenda. We want to discuss it. And approve some of that. I think for these, we're probably fine with that approach. Does that seem reasonable to everyone?
We approved it, wait.
Would it be possible to add a line at the end of all the documents that said 3 readings, or like we're not readopted on this date with it, just because I think with the policy committee right now, like we're reviewing, and it would be nice to have that for future. We're like, okay, this policy was readopted November, blah, blah, blah. So we can go back to those notes to see what conversation happened.
What are you asking for? I'm sorry, this is the first part.
At the end, you know how it says date 1, they adopted, and legal reference, like to add one line that says date, like readopted, or because we are readopted.
When it says, when it will say policy adopted, the new date will be on there. Is that what you mean?
I would love to have like a historical history of the policy itself, so that when new board members come in and they're revisiting this policy, they can kind of revisit the history. So like one example is right now we're looking at class size. And we're like, oh, why did this happen? So we were able to go back to see what those conversations were about, so that we don't have to dig every
I
time.
think what you're asking is date, first adopted, readoption, readoption.
Or revised.
Revise, yes, revise
would
these
that work?
dates, yes.
If you want to see the old policies, like what old language was, those are all in hard copy in the central office. Just FYI on that.
Yeah, because you wouldn't be able to put date adopted and have you wouldn't be able to have the old date on a new document because it's a new policy with new language. Right? So you wouldn't want the old date on
That
on
one
that.
right there can pull up any policy we want from like 15 years back.
Yeah, it's just like, but it could be something that's housed on in our new, we've been reimagining how to keep the historical data on policies, basically, because it's been a struggle for us to find, different versions and notes from previous policy committees. So I think that's the direction Amanda is heading in with that suggestion, but I get why it can't be that way. But I think we can include it in we're talking about having a Google Doc of notes next to every policy, and it could be in there.
Check with have you checked with the VSBA on that?
Yeah, open meeting laws with Google Docs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, just make sure that I don't know what the rules are, but just make sure we're in
Yeah.
compliance with whatever we suggest. We want to just make sure that we're in compliance with that.
It hasn't happened yet. Another plan that has not come to fruition. But it's on our radar because we've already been talking to the SBA about it
Okay, good.
back when Anna was still here.
Back in the good old days.
And what are you checking with the VSBA on? Sorry.
But it's about keeping, our vision is to hopefully keep a master document of all policy committee notes on a particular policy. So like when Bridget and Ryan discussed the class size policy in 2018, they would pull their notes, maybe consolidate them and put them into this document so that they would be there, on this date, on 2018, we discussed this reason to change the policy this way. And that then the new iteration of the policy committee would take our notes on class size policy, consolidate them and put them into that same document. So we would never be revising the document at any point.
Yeah, it's a historical.
Yeah, it's just
Yeah.
sort of like keeping track of the minutes basically and some of the meeting notes on individual policies so that it's mostly for future policy committee members to be able to go back and see, well, why did we change, the class size in this way on that date? What did it used to be? But it also is good transparency for community stakeholders to be able to access our thinking on why we change policies in certain ways.
And would it be, that sounds like it sounds complicated, sounds awesome. If the VSBA objects to this document, would it be possible to have in the minutes, the date the previous policy was, like when we finalize a policy, replaces this policy finalized on that date? And then at least you have a trail.
Yeah,
I
I
don't know.
mean, something we could look into is if you look at like the bottom of statutes, there's like a little history of when changes were made to a specific statute. I don't know that anybody does that for school board policies, or if there's a certain structure, but you could put at the bottom. Previous policy adopted, like in parentheses.
Yeah, I think maybe that's why I was like, this happens sometimes. Must be in the legal stuff. Well, this is all work in progress.
Yeah.
So like once we have more work in our process, then
That's good.
we'll keep the tab on.
All right. So, I think we're good. Policy reading. And look at that, we're 13 minutes early. We can
Wait,
go,
we only had one?
go back and discuss budget goals and priorities again. I'm
I'm
joking, I'm joking.
Joking,
I'm
joking.
joking. Do I
He's a
have,
funny guy.
do I have a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Second,
I second.
all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, thanks everyone.
Nice.
And your